Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you, of course, to a special live stream about a very interesting topic. Some of you probably have been exposed to the fact that Islam and the Quran has some questionable sources. But with me here, of course, today to discuss this particular influence by the Gnostics in this case into the teaching of Islam in general, and possibly even some highlights of Quranic passages, if the time allows, of course, and based on the research that my brother has done. And of course, we're talking about Vocab Malone. And hello, Vocab. How are you, brother?
I'm doing all right. Good to see you, Fadi.
So Vocab, for the benefit of those that maybe they're living under a rock and they don't know anything about you, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Sure. Street Apologist Live is the name of the program I do at youtube.com/Vocab Malone. And urban apologetics is the specialty. So I do a lot of stuff dealing with urban cults and alternative spiritualities that rise up in the city with a focus and emphasis on polemics and helping people come out of the cult known as Hebrew Israelism, sometimes called the Black Israelites.
Yes, it's interesting. I saw something that you posted recently about some of them Mormons, I guess, from Mormon background or in Utah.
Well, they were in Utah, these particular guys. They themselves were not Mormons. They were not Mormons, but they were in Utah, in Salt Lake City. And there are a number of Hebrew Israelites who actually do use the Book of Mormon. Now, these guys weren't one of them, but some of them do use the Book of Mormon as proof text for various things. But that's sort of a minority within Hebrew Israelism. But yeah, these guys are regular old One West Hebrew Israelites and out there doing their thing in Salt Lake City. Who would have thought?
Yeah. So I just wanted people to know if really, I mean, in my humble view, Vocab is the go-to when it comes to the issue of Hebrew Israelites. And I'm sure some of the people here probably don't even know what we're talking about. We did one show, myself and Vocab, on this, but he talks about it all the time. And I think maybe I'll bring you back to discuss it based on any new information that you may have, brother. But all that to say is that today we're going to talk about Gnosticism and its influence on Islam, or at least its influence on some of the alleged revelation in Islam. Mm-hmm. So why don't you give a quick background about Gnosticism? What do we mean by it? And then we'll dive right into your presentation.
Yeah, so when we talk about Gnosticism, we're talking about the early competition to Christianity. Now, you and I, we read the New Testament. We don't really see a Gnostic problem just yet. You see little traces I'll talk about briefly. You mainly see the elements of Judaizing and the problems of trying to, force Gentiles to essentially become Jewish as if they're still under the old covenant. And you have issues related to that. Of course, in the Gospels itself, you have issues related to the Sabbath. Then you get into the book of Acts, you start to have some different problems. Then you read Galatians, and, these are challenges based upon the context they're in and what's happening. You see a little bit of Gnostic stuff, it appears, probably in 1 John. In the epistle of 1 John, he seems to go out of his way to emphasize that Jesus Christ came in the flesh, and indeed says those who say otherwise are Antichrist. That relates to a Gnostic tendency called Docetism. And this is something that we actually were able to learn about in seminary, and had some great times learning about some of these early heresies and why they were a challenge to the church. And one of the main reasons they were a challenge to the church, Al-Fadi, these early Gnostic heresies, is because they appealed to kind of Greek cultural sensibilities where people were influenced by something called Neoplatonism. And basically, here's what it boils down to. They like parts of the Bible story, but they're reshaping it in a way where it usually ends up denying the goodness of the physical creation. That's really the key. And make salvation about some enlightenment via secret knowledge, which is really kind of a liberation from physical reality more than it is really salvation. And so you don't have the sons of Christ and the sons of Adam being the main dividing line, as it really is when you look at the gospel story. But it's more like who's an enlightened seeker and who's an idiot. And they thought that they were the enlightened seekers and the regular Christians were the idiots. And what did they do? They basically retold tales of Jesus and the disciples in their image, meaning they would apply Gnostic principles to new stories that they were crafting and creating that would have Jesus be the main character a lot of times, sometimes Mary, different people, usually Jesus, and he would be basically a Gnostic teacher now. He's saying the stuff they believe, and this is a secret wisdom he's divulging to the disciples. Now, all these books were written after the disciples were all dead. And so, they are clearly forgeries, pseudepigrapha, and they're clearly derivative of the Gospels. What I mean by that is a lot of them take place in between the 40-day window after the resurrection, before the ascension. Well, if that's the setting of the time, what's that tell you? The Gospels have already laid out the framework there. They're trying to plop down Gnosticism into a gap where there's less information given. And that's why sometimes they get into infancy narratives or stories about Jesus's childhood. Why do they do that there? It's another place where they can put stuff in there because they view it as sort of a box remaining to be filled, and they fill it up with Gnosticism instead of a Hebraic Christian worldview. Because obviously, if you're going to have Genesis, you can't have evil matter being evil because God created it all. But a lot of these versions of Gnosticism, that's what they did. They basically said the Old Testament God is evil and wicked, and Jesus came to free us from the bonds of that. Now, there's varieties in Gnosticism. So when I say this, we're talking about most versions have some of this. There's more and there's less. For example, the Gospel of Thomas is a little less Gnostic than some of the later ones, such as, the hypostasis of the archons or the Gospel of Judas, which are way Gnostic, whereas Thomas is mildly Gnostic. But it was a real problem because it appealed to people's elitism too. You want to be part of the secret club, right? We got the knowledge, bro. And so it made them look better and the regular old Christians look like dummies. But guys like Irenaeus, Tertullian, and whatnot, they fought against this with pen, and truth won out at the end of the day. Truth won out. Progressive scholars will try to tell you, Fadi, it's all about who had power or something. But no, it has to do more simply with who had who really was presenting a true case. And when your whole system is based upon forgeries, or you're willing to just invent new documents, well, you're not going to win if the Christians care about those documents. But here's the thing, Fadi. Years later, somehow some of these stories circulated within Muhammad's earshot, and he ended up putting them in the Quran.
That's right. That's right. Especially, for instance, from the infancy gospel, or the something about the birth of Christ when he spoke in the cradle, or even the Gospel of Thomas and the creation of birds and breathing life into them. But anyway, I don't want to jump ahead of myself here. So you have a presentation for us, and I would like really to turn it over to you, and I will begin to interact with you, and we'll see. I'll keep an eye also on any comments or questions that might be important to address.
Are you going to be keeping an eye on the live chat?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to hear what people have to say, because sometimes you might get some Muslim gentlemen or women who come and say, we have the real Jesus. We have the real Jesus. And then you start talking about these sources, and it's interesting. Their excuses they make are interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, we'll be praying for them.
Yes. Okay.
All right, brother. Go ahead. Take it over.
All right. Let's do this. Let's see how this works. I've got a presentation, and we'll go through this, and I'm ready to listen to any questions, and I'd love to hear what people have to say. But let's talk about the Gnostic sources in the Quran, because they absolutely are there. And it's an embarrassment to the Quran, because the Quran is supposed to be uncreated, eternal, from God. And yet you have basically Greek pagan philosophy in there. Well, that's not all you got. You also have Orthodox and unorthodox Jewish beliefs. You got not just Tanakh, but you've also got Talmud. You have Orthodox Christianity that has somewhat of an influence, obviously. You also have the heretical Christian sects, not just the Gnostics. There's others as well, including legends and folklore, such as the Seven Sleeping Sisters. You have pagan folklore and customs as well. And you have some Gnostic teaching or Gnostic tales, because Gnostic teaching proper really kind of contradicts Islam. And that's important to understand, that Islam overtly contradicts Gnosticism, and Gnosticism overtly contradicts Gnosticism overtly contradicts Islam, and yet you still have these stories from Gnostic sources. Well, that doesn't seem right. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Surah 575. The Messiah, son of Mary, was no other than a messenger. So here, this obviously the surah is going out of its way to downgrade who Christ really was, right? Because the Christians, despite whatever flaws they may have had, at least it seems that they were letting Muhammad understand that Jesus is to be understood as God. So Muhammad has to say, no, 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 he's a son of Mary. He's nothing, just another messenger. Certainly Jesus was a messenger, but if we're going to use that term for a prophet, but that's not all. In fact, you might even say Jesus was the message, right? Messengers, the like of whom had passed away before him, and his mother was a saintly woman, and they both used to eat earthly food. So there's an emphasis here with Jesus's earthly status. Now, we don't deny that as Christians. Jesus is 100% man, no doubt about that. But don't want to get too far off track, because this is not a discussion about the deity of Christ. But here's what I want everyone to realize. This is focusing on Jesus's earthly embodiment and reliance upon food as a human. That's the way the Qur'an is putting this, right? And therefore the idea is he's not God. Well, that's really different than Gnosticism. Gnosticism doesn't want you to rely upon physical creation. Gnosticism would not want to have an enlightened Jesus who had to eat. Gnosticism would not emphasize this element. In fact, Gnosticism has a Jesus who is not human or barely human. For example, I mentioned Docetism. Well, I didn't really get to clearly define it there, but part of what Docetism is, and that's an element of Gnosticism, Docetism says that Jesus's physical reality, his like manifestation, was essentially like a phantasm, that Jesus seemed to be human. It comes from the Greek word dokeo. That's where they get the word Docetism, the name for the heresy. And so this is something that would not be very Docetic, but Gnostics usually had an element of Docetism in what they taught. And so you see that this is something that would be denied by Islamic worldview, and yet these sources are still in there. So that's an interesting thing, that you have basically sources that come from a contradictory source, in the Quran itself. So let's talk about some examples here regarding Mary and the birth of Christ, regarding young Jesus, and regarding denial of the crucifixion. Those are the three we'll kind of look at here today, and maybe hit a few rabbit trails. Mary and the birth of Christ, first example of Gnostic sources in the Quran. Surah 3:44. This is of the tidings of things hidden. We reveal it unto thee, Muhammad. Thou wast not present with them when they threw their pens to know which of them should be the guardian of Mary, nor wast thou present with them when they quarreled thereupon. Now, this is sort of an aside in the Quran, in a way, this verse. And what it's relaying is that, hey, Muhammad, you weren't there for these events, so it has to be told to you by divine revelation. It's actually supposed to be like some kind of evidence of his like divine prophet status, supposedly. But what's interesting about it is the example that's given of something that Muhammad was not there for. Because what was he not there for, according to this? The choosing of Joseph to be Mary's guardian. Now, that may not be guardian, maybe basically in the sense of even, eventually when we talk about the fuller context, end up husband in regards to Joseph. So when you look at the fuller context of what's going on here, it's a strange story about people basically throwing something, and the original source seems to indicate axes or something like that, to find out which one of them had to be with Mary. And so where is that a story like that at all? It's clearly not in the gospel, right? When we see Joseph and Mary, they're already betrothed, right? Well, this comes from the proto-evangelion, or sometimes called the proto-gospel. On the screen, I'm just going to call it the Gospel of James, not the Epistle of James. This is a pseudepigraphal work I'm about to show you here in a second. This so-called proto-evangelion or proto-evangelion of James is also sometimes called the infancy gospel of James, or sometimes even called the birth of Mary, because it really emphasizes or focuses on her as she's like the precursor to this. And so it's like Mary's story. And in the story of this proto-evangelion of James, she's living in the temple until she's 12. Then the priests figure out, okay, who should she marry? Because it's not right for her to live into the temple anymore. And Joseph is chosen by this thing going on here with the casting which maybe lots. You get different translations, but some kind of selection to marry her. And he objects. What's he say? He says this: I have children and I am an old man and she is a young girl. I am afraid lest I become a laughingstock to the sons of Israel. So what you have in the background to this is this proto-gospel of James. And you've got Joseph saying, I don't really want to marry her. I'm older. She's younger. By the way, Al-Fadi, since this proto-gospel of James has this fallacious story of Joseph saying he's older and she's younger, maybe that's why Muhammad liked it.
That is true. That is true.
He was like, I can relate to that, except, he's not objecting. It's he's all for it. I just wonder if that's what's going on there. I don't know. But so supposedly Joseph says this, and the priest tells Joseph, hey man, you better do this thing. You've been selected by God. You're going to get judged. So Joseph, out of fear, links up with Mary, but never touches her because he supposedly has kids from a previous marriage. So this work is the first work to insist that Mary was a perpetual virgin. And believe it or not, sometimes the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics appeal to this proto-gospel of James to talk about this, because this Joseph has no intention of having any kind of relation physically with Mary. It's just a legal thing. And so that's what you get. Now, this is something that most scholars recognize is written around the mid-2nd century. Now let's take a look at actually what it says with this in the background. And this is probably, maybe I'll say the least clear out of all of them, because it's sort of a complicated little tale, but nonetheless, it's important to know this. So this is from the Gospel of James. I'm trying to make sure it's all on the screen. It's cutting off a little bit of the edge. So some of the edges cut off for some reason. I'm trying to get it so you guys can see it, but it looks like it doesn't want to cooperate too much. So part of it, but I'll read it to you, and you can see most of it there. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know why it's doing that, but anything you can do, that's no problem.
I apologize. It might be something on my end. I can just but it's only like 2 letters on the left that you can't see. But let's look at this. This is from the Gospel of James, or the proto. It's usually called the proto-evangelion. I always say evangelion because I'm thinking of the Greek. But this is from that chapter 9. Joseph, throwing away his axe, went out to meet them. When they had assembled, they went away to the high priest, taking with them their rods, and he, taking the rods of all of them, entered into the temple and prayed. And having ended the prayer, he took the rods and came out. Okay, there, I fixed it a little bit. There we go. And gave them to them, but there was no sign in them. And Joseph took his rod last, and behold, a dove came out of the rod and flew upon Joseph's head. And the priest said to Joseph, thou hast been chosen by lot to take in thy keeping the virgin of the Lord. Now, this is what that's referring to. And there's an article at Answering Islam where he shows all the similarities. He actually goes into great detail in this article that talks about this. It's at Answering Islam. It's called Surah Miriam, the Curse of the Apocrypha, by Masood Mashiin. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. I apologize. But it's quite a detailed article and goes into much further depth and shows this, and I think does a great job. And so that's the background to Surah 344, because clearly, again, it's not biblical. And for those who would like to see that article, there is the resource I just mentioned. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. A lot more there to that. And so that's kind of the most minor one. Let's get into some of the others. You guys ready to get into some of the others?
I'm sure they are.
Okay. This one right here is probably the one, if anybody knows something, it's most likely this is the one they know. Young Jesus making clay birds. Second category of examples of Gnostic sources in the Qur'an. Young Jesus making the clay birds. This showed up in a movie that recently came out in February of this year called The Book of Clarence. And in the Book of Clarence, they actually have this, okay? And they show this happening, Jesus doing this. And believe it or not, it was even in the movie Young Messiah, which was supposed to be more of a straight retelling of some idea of Jesus's childhood. So let's see what the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, section 2 says, which is clearly the source for this account in the Quran, which we'll read second this time, switching the order. All right, here it goes. Having made some soft clay, he fashioned out of it 12 sparrows. And it was Sabbath when he did these things, and there were also many other children playing with him. And a certain Jew, seeing what Jesus was doing, playing on the Sabbath, went off immediately and said to his father Joseph, "Behold, thy son is at the stream and has taken clay and made of it 12 birds and has profaned the Sabbath." So, what do you have there? Well, if you look at the Infancy Gospel of Thomas here, section 2, it's funny in a way because it's child Jesus, right? Making birds, but he's doing it on a Sabbath. So even little Jesus, even when he's younger there, right? He's still having Sabbath problems with people who are, more legalist than he is apparently. And so he makes these clay pigeons, and then they, eventually they are going to run off in this story. So let's take a look at that next part. Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Joseph, coming to the place and seeing, cried out to him, saying, "Wherefore dost thou on the Sabbath what is not lawful to do?" And Jesus clapped his hand and cried out to the sparrows and said to them, "Off you go." And the sparrows flew and went off crying. I wish they were doves so we could make a Prince reference there, when doves cry. But I guess for now we'll just have to make it when sparrows fly or when sparrows cry or something. Anyways, and the Jews seeing this were amazed, and they went away and reported to their chief men what they had seen Jesus doing. Now, a couple problems with this from the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. First of all, this sounds like a miracle. And I remember reading in John that the first sign was what he did at the wedding at Cana, turning the water into wine, And so you say, well, it sounds like a miracle. You got youth Jesus doing over here, according to this. But this is the kind of nonsense that's in here, because notice here what you have happening. This is a purposeless miracle, it appears. You know what I mean? He was like in trouble making clay pigeons on the Sabbath, and then instead of just being done or stopping, he claps his hand and has them fly away. Well, who does this benefit? What is this for? And it's interesting because the Quran's going to say that Jesus did this. Sounds like a miracle of creation once you got Jesus doing that. Let's take a look here. Surah 349, Surah 349 in the Quran now, keeping in mind what we just read from the infancy work there, okay? "And make him a messenger to the children of Israel, who will say, Indeed, I have come to you with a sign from your Lord, and that I design for you from clay that which is like the form of a bird, and then I breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by permission of Allah." Now, I remember having conversations about this with Muslims, and they would always bring that up because I would say, hey, this sounds like you have Jesus doing a miracle of creation, something that only God can do, right? And they would always say, notice it says by permission of Allah. And I would say, I don't hold that this count is valid. But if you hold that it's valid, you have Jesus doing an act of creation, which seems like God activity. And their fallback every time, it was with Allah's permission. And I would say, well, who else did this by Allah's permission according to the Quran? Is this something ever? Because I don't tell me if there's other guys doing this, but I'm not aware of any. And then I would bring up the second part, which is also this comes from a Gnostic source. And look at Jesus. He's kind of like bragging about his miracles, but it's a humble brag because he's all by permission of Allah. And I cure the blind and the leper, and I give life to the dead by permission of Allah. And I inform you of what you eat and what you store in your houses. Indeed, in that it is a sign for you if you are believers. So here's Jesus talking to the children of Israel, right? And, it's actually, it looks like it's, when I'm saying, I'm taking a shortcut. It looks like it's Allah talking about who will be the messenger, Jesus, but I'm just taking a shortcut and having Jesus do the quote. But it's that's what it looks like, because he's gonna say this, and so he's gonna say, I come to you a sign. Well, what's a sign there? I'm gonna make clay like from a form of bird and breathe to become a bird by permission of Allah. So according to this, it's slightly different than the account, but breathing the breath of life into it, which he did by the clapping of the hands in the other account. Well, this is, again, it's obvious that this comes from somewhere because it doesn't come from the Gospels, but we do know a source, infancy narratives, this infancy gospel, that's its source. And it's like, well, why is that in there? The infancy gospel of Thomas. But it gets worse. It gets weirder. Not as he just, clapping and making clay birds, but he's speaking from the cradle. Maybe I should put these in the reverse order. That way I've got, Jesus doing the miracles as he goes on or something like that. But nonetheless, this is baby Jesus speaking from the cradle. This is from a different source called the Arabic Infancy Gospel. The reason why it has to do with the language, not necessarily like that's the name on it. But here's the Arabic Infancy Gospel, and here's chapter 1. We find what follows in the book of Joseph the high priest, who lived in the time of Christ. Some say that he is Caiaphas. He has said that Jesus spoke, and indeed, when he was lying in his cradle, said to Mary, his mother. So, supposedly, this is recorded, this Arabic Infancy Gospel is telling us, and you're going to have Jesus in the cradle talking to Mary, and look what he's going to say. I am Jesus. I am Jesus, the Son of God, the Logos, whom thou hast brought forth, as the angel Gabriel announced to thee. My Father has sent me for the salvation of the world. Salvation of the world. All right. Okay. Well, this is interesting. A lot of stuff Jesus says here is like actually, a little baby Jesus is like speaking Orthodox here, right? Jesus, Son of God, Logos, brought forth of Mary, true enough, virgin conception. Angel Gabriel announced, true. Father sent me to salvation. Okay. But the problem is it destroys the incarnation, and it destroys the actual narrative in Luke that says after the temple account, when he's astounding the people there in the temple, it says he grew in stature before God and men. Well, here you've got baby Jesus telling you with full self-awareness everything that he is from jump in the cradle, and is already talking. If Jesus can do all this and form these kinds of sentences, if he can do all this and speak theology like this, why is he in the cradle? Sorry, I put on some chapstick before we started, and it's bothering me now. This doesn't make sense, but continuing on with the narrative of the baby.
But I mean, seriously, why do you think the emphasis on the cradle? I mean, because Islam definitely capitalized on this, and they will always tell you, oh, look, we love Jesus, and look, it talks about his miracles that you guys didn't talk about. I always respond and say, okay, let's assume Jesus did this. It seems to me that the Holy Spirit didn't really want to put an emphasis on something like that, and it talked about other parts. So what that he spoke in the cradle? I mean, what's the point? What is it that we're going to learn from that, from a Quranic standpoint?
Yeah, there's really, what exactly is the impact of all that, other than just to basically expose Muhammad? Now, there's a thing about that cradle and that story, Al-Fadi. I hear that it remained until the time of Muhammad, years later, centuries later, that same exact cradle, and Muhammad, he robbed it. Get it? He robbed the cradle. Yeah. Sorry. This is a bad joke. This is not a historical account, everyone, okay? Just making a joke. So in this first gospel, the infancy of Jesus, you see Jesus talking from the cradle. That's what he says on the left-hand side. Now look at CIRA 346, what it says. He shall preach to men in his cradle and in the prime of manhood, and shall lead a righteous life. So this is a little kind of overview of Jesus's life. Now, some translations of the Quran don't say prime of manhood. They indicate that he's elderly. So the contrast there is, young and old. But that's problematic if he's taken up somehow at the age of 30. He's not living an older life. And so other translations will say prime of manhood there. So this is like basically a prophecy about Jesus's ministry He's going to be preaching to people in the cradle. Well, it's a fuller account given in Surah 19. Let's take a look at this here. And Al-Fadi, I don't know if you could come on for a second, because I just can't pass this first line up. I know it's a little bit of rabbit trail, but Surah 19 starts off with the address to Mary saying, "O sister of Aaron."
Yeah.
What's the problem with that? Is there a problem there?
Of course. I mean, there's so many articles written about this, especially in Answering Islam. And simply put is this: the Quran made a colossal mistake claiming that Mary, and that's Mary, the mother of Jesus, in Arabic, it's Maryam, is the same Maryam who happened to be the sister of Moses and Aaron. And that's 1300 years earlier. Now, of course, I love it when the scholars of Islam try their best to explain it away and say, no, she's from the lineage of that Mary, or lineage of Moses and Aaron. But no, it would say daughter of, not sister of. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, you can say, hey, Vocab, son of Abraham. Fine. I mean, the Gospel of Matthew started this way. This is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, we know there is a big gap of people in between, but that's what it means to be in the lineage, not the brother of David and the brother of Abraham.
Right. Now, when I brought this up, I've had some Muslim friends of mine say this. They say, it's a metaphorical way to speak of a Jewish woman. And so I asked them, can you give me some of their examples where Jewish women were all called sister of Aaron? You know? But I don't know. Maybe they say it's only certain Jewish women. But, real quick before we jump back in there, I didn't give too much background about the infancy gospel of Thomas, the one that we shared from earlier. And this is usually understood to be written in the mid to late 2nd century. So sometime between, 150, 199. And it sometimes is called just people. There's a debate about what the name should be, but usually you'll just see infancy gospel of Thomas. And there's little funny pictures online that you can find where people have like drawn images of this, like young Jesus making the clay birds. You can find these kind of common images from that. It's actually written in Greek. The author's supposed to be Thomas the Israelite, but it's mentioned actually in Eusebius' work as a heretical fiction. And of course, you got other people condemning it as well. And so that's the infancy gospel of Thomas. Then the Arabic infancy gospel, which is sometimes called the Syriac infancy gospel, is another one of these. There's only 2 surviving manuscripts of this one, 1299 AD, and another one from the 15th or 16th century in Arabic. And apparently these were copied in the area of northern Iraq. And some people even have said that maybe even that these themselves have been influenced by the Quran. This is one of the few ones where people say, well, wait a minute, is this go back all the way? That's an interesting question. But nonetheless, we have these different accounts of this talking Jesus. And let's take a look here as I put on the presenter screen.
If you don't mind, brother, I'm just going to address something here that is happening in the live chat. So everybody, don't worry. Julia Trisler is on timeout. And Julia, if you're listening to me right now, I put you in timeout just to give you a chance to get back on topic. If you refuse to get back on topic and come up with these delusional comments about governments deciding which verses are divinely inspired and which one is not, which is ridiculous in and of itself, all that to say is you will be in my big block party, and there is a lot of people are partying in that block. So just giving you a warning. Go ahead, brother.
And just last thing, because I could see a Muslim saying, look, the Arabic infancy gospel is after the Quran. But here's the thing. Our 2 manuscripts that we currently possess that's true. So, all cards on the table. But, and you can read articles about this, that it originates back to older Syriac sources from the 5th or 6th century. And there's lots of information about that online. This is the one specific one I thought people might bring that up. So I'm bringing that up just to show that even though the copies are here, the actual the actual provenance or creation of it's back there. Because, I hope people understand that whenever you have your a copy of something, that doesn't indicate that that's when it originated or that's the first example of it. It's just the oldest surviving copy that we have of the document. So coming back now to Surah 19, I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see that. Where to go? And by the way, shout out to the live chat. I hope everyone's having a good day today. I know that I am, and I'm glad you guys are here. So here's Surah 19. Oh, sister of Aaron. So this is them being concerned about Mary being pregnant. So here's what they say to her. Thy father was not a wicked man, nor was thy mother a harlot. And, since it's the sister of Aaron, maybe they should also say, and your brother Moses was a good guy too. Sorry, I got some jokes here today, right? Then she pointed to him. So this is Mary's defense. They're like, yo, you're a wicked woman getting, having a baby. What's wrong with you, sister of Aaron, Mary? Right? She points to the baby, and they're like, how can we talk to one who is a child in the cradle? So, they're asking the question of like, why are you pointing to him? What's he going to say? This isn't Stewie from Family Guy, when talking babies, what's going on? And then Jesus saves Mary. He said, I am indeed a servant of Allah. He has given me the book and has made me a prophet. Think about a baby prophet, like just think about it. And has made me blessed wheresoever I may be, and has enjoined upon me prayer and almsgiving so long as I remain alive, and has made me dutiful toward her who bore me, and hath not made me arrogant, unblessed. Peace on me the day I was born, and the day I die, and the day I shall be raised alive. Such was Jesus, son of Mary. This is a statement of the truth concerning which they doubt. Okay. So here he's basically defending Mary's chastity, and he's like, yo, I really am that guy. I'm a servant of Allah, I got the book. And, if this talking Jesus in the cradle has a book, does he have the book now? Is he able to read a book? I mean, he's forming complete sentences, filled with theology and everything else. Is he going to give the book later? Does he have the book on him? Was he born with the book? Is he going to write the book? What is going on here? And has made me a prophet. Okay, yes, of course, Jesus is a prophet, but I don't think it's proper to think of him operating in his prophetic ministry from the cradle. He's doing something different, taking naps, But this says he's blessed wherever he goes, is enjoined upon me prayer, almsgiving, so long as I remain alive, made me dutiful toward her who bore me, hath not made me arrogant, unblessed. Peace on me the day I was born and the day I die. Wait a minute.
Yeah. And by the way, I can comment on the book one, by the way. Let me come back again.
Oh, okay, good.
I look for things like this and I say, okay, that's great. So the Quran is saying Jesus received the book. Either we're talking about the Injil, the New Testament book, or we're talking about the Old Testament. Either way, the God of Islam have no problem handing him that book.
Wait, well, he's going to get it handed to him, or?
Yeah, well, of course, the Muslims think about the book dropped from heaven, man.
But I mean, what do they actually think? Do they think Jesus is saying he's going to speak the Injil and people are going to write it, or he wrote it? Like, I don't actually know what they say.
He has a book, man, and he gave it to somebody, and that somebody screwed up big time, So that's what's going on.
Yeah, it's like a relay race. The first runner is way ahead of the others. And
yeah, exactly.
And they just drop it.
That guy who ruins it for the team,
Jesus handed it off to the
Yeah, and then Allah waited 600 years to fix that problem because he's slow in running. He didn't catch up with the guy.
He's like, I'll get around to it eventually. I'll get to it. Yeah, this speech of baby Jesus in Surah 19 obviously has another problematic passage because it says, upon the day I die.
Yeah, of course. That's a whole different story, bro. Keep going.
Well, that's one of the next ones we're going to get into, but I just want to draw that to everyone's attention. It says, peace on me the day I was born. Okay, he was born even according to the Quran. We got that. Okay. And the day I die, well, I don't know if he died according to the Quran or did he? What's going on? And the day I shall be raised alive. That sounds like resurrection, but must not be resurrection, right, guys? Because it seems like we got contradictions. But some of you already know where I'm going with this. So let's continue and look at CIRA 19.
I tell you where we're going with this, bro. London is falling, and these movies, I can see Islam is falling, bro.
Yeah, I mean, once you can really expose this stuff to the world and people can see it, it really is undeniable, honestly. And so I remember when I brought this up to Elton Simpson, that was known as Ibrahim, but the world knew him as Elton Simpson. He's one of the guys who tried to go get Robert Spencer at the cartoon drawing contest, and he was here in Phoenix. So I talked to him, and I brought these things up to him. Specifically, what about the Gnostic sources in the Quran? And I gave him some examples. Now, he already knew about them. So he was he was a Dawa guy. He knew Islamic apologetics and polemics against Christianity. He wasn't an uninformed Muslim, Elton. But I always called him Ibrahim. So I brought this up and he said, if it's true, it's true. I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, Allah can inspire a source and we can use that source later. If it's true, it doesn't matter where it came from. It's true. Well, how do you know it's true though? Because it's in the Quran. Okay. So are the other parts of the Gnostic gospel that is being referenced here, are they true? I don't know, maybe. But how do you know this one's true? Because it's in the Quran. Okay, so that was the kind of nature of the conversation we had, and I imagine some of you probably had a similar conversation as that. So you go on and you see the whole talking from the cradle is clearly from Gnostic sources. And here's the big one. This is the big one, the denial of the crucifixion. Oops, I see a small misspelling on my slide. Let me just get out of that real quick so no one notices. I saw a little typo.
Well, it's okay, man. English is not your first language. You just
yeah, that's my excuse. That's my excuse. So before we get into the denial of the crucifixion, Al-Fadi and everyone listening, we need to look at what the Bible says about this topic because it's so important and so key and really helps put everything in perspective here. All right, so here we are, 1 Corinthians 1:18. Listen what the Apostle Paul says. And isn't this true and been true and always true? Yes, indeed. Here's what it says. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. First of all, that's good. And if you're a Christian, I know you can relate to that. You can feel that. You know what I mean? You know that this is how God has granted you repentance and forgiveness and atoned for your sin through Jesus Christ. And you realize this is the power of God at hand, saving a wretch like me. And it's a beautiful thing. And then you want to share that with somebody and they're like, this is really stupid. This is foolish, basically. Well, at that point, we know that it's because they're perishing, just like all of us were outside of Christ. My point is that there's a central emphasis in Scripture upon the cross and its power because of what God did there, because of what the triune God did there and the impact and influence and how much it matters and how central it was to this whole divine plan. But look at this larger passage in context. I know it's a lot, but it's central to understand because I'm not trying to be rude, but Muslims, if something is central to the message of the gospel, and that's the very thing your sources attack, you got to ask yourself, who would do that? Who would be interested in that? Understand what I'm saying? The message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and I will thwart the cleverness of the intelligent. Maybe I should do it like this. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and I will thwart the cleverness of the intelligent. Where is the wise man? Where is the expert in the Mosaic law? Where is the debater of this age? Has God not made the wisdom of the world foolish? For since in the wisdom of God, the world by its wisdom did not know God. Can't get there through just brain power, man. God was pleased to save those who believe by the foolishness of preaching. Christians, you got to speak that gospel. For Jews demanded miraculous signs and Greeks asked for wisdom. By the way, you see the beginnings of the Gnostic impulse when, even there. But we preach about a crucified Christ, a stumbling block to Jews. What? The Messiah got killed by pagan Romans? Forget about it. And foolishness to Gentiles. What? Your guy died on a physical cross and physically died and was conquered by physical reality? And he was, what? But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. So when a Muslim tells you that Allah would not work this way through the cross, and the cross is a silly thing the Christians invented, or whatever they say, realize it's just this coming true, this impulse that people have, just still being right there, present and prominent. Just remember that. But this is important because this is exactly what happens in the Quran, a denial of that very thing with the surah that says this: they did not kill him, they did not crucify him, rather it only appeared to them. Appeared to them. That's
Exactly.
4:157.
It's very powerful. Yeah.
Yes. And you see the Arabic on the screen. That's just for your benefit, Al Fadi. It's not helping me.
Yeah, because I speak in tongues. That helps.
Well, I could get all gringo and try to wama, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Yeah, we don't want to ruin the show. Well, this idea, and don't worry, we're going to return to that verse in a second here, and we're going to look at other ways it's translated. So hold on. But take a look at this, Lives of the Prophets. Lives of the Prophets. This is a famous work by a Sunni exegete. He died 1035. His name's on the screen. Al-Falabi. And he elaborates on this surah. And listen to what he says. So this is the way certain Muslims have understood it, right? That's the point. And that's a page from one of the copies of this book. When he who was like Jesus was crucified, notice the first line, what it says there. When he who was like Jesus was crucified. So someone's up on the cross who's like Jesus, right? There came Mary, the mother of Jesus, and a woman for whom he had prayed and whom he had cured of devils, weeping over the crucified one. But Jesus came to them and said, "For whom are you weeping?" "For you," they answered. "But God has raised me up, and nothing but good has befallen me." This person was but a likeness for them. Now, I know that this is not the Quran. We read the Quranic passage. This is an elaboration in a very well-known work within Islamic history as far as Sunni scholarship. And this elaboration really sounds like the Gnostic tales we're going to read here in a second. And so I just really want to draw your attention to that. Take a screenshot of this. Remember this. Don't worry, we're going to go back to the surah itself. But my goodness. So let's take a look here. But before we do, you know what? I'm going to skip these just for a second because I want to go right back to this and stay on track. I've got some other things that I'll try to get to if we have to. It's basically, I have a couple passages from the Bible that the Docetists and the Gnostics would twist to try to do the whole Jesus didn't die on the cross thing. But I'm going to bypass those for now. If we have time, we'll circle back around. And I just want to stick with the Quranic stuff just for now. So I'm skipping a couple slides to help everyone follow along, hopefully. So looking at Surah 4, 157, 158. Okay. Read it now again. In a longer context here. They're saying, surely we have killed the Messiah, Isa, son of Maryam, the apostle of Allah. And they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but appeared to them so, like Isa. And most surely those who differ therein are only in a doubt about it. They have no knowledge respecting it, but only follow conjecture. And they killed him not for sure. Nay, Allah took him up to himself, and Allah is mighty wise. Now, one thing I find interesting about this is they're like, in this translation, which is basically the essence of the passage, does say, oh yeah, they're just conjecturing. They don't really know. They don't really know, but I know. Let me tell you what really happened. He didn't die, But it's funny because then when you actually ask a Muslim, okay, who was on that cross? And guess what? It's all conjecture. One guy says Judas, another guy says Simon, someone says one of the guards got switched up in there, someone else says only God knows. You even have small sects of that got Jesus going to India, all kinds of wild stuff. But it's like, this is the conjecture is a result of this passage within Islamic history. The conjecture is on your guys' side. All the Christians are saying Jesus died on the cross. The Romans were saying Jesus died on the cross. The Greeks who were aware said Jesus died on the cross, including their historians who wrote about it after. And the enemies of Jesus back then and now were saying Jesus died on the cross. Historians now, even today, guys like Bart Ehrman, Jesus died on the cross. The conjecture is on your guys' side, Let's just call it like it is. I want to look at another translation, Halali Khan, because he kind of gets, he amplifies it a little bit here to understand this passage here. And because of their saying and boast, we killed Messiah, Isa, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they killed him not, nor crucified him. But the resemblance of Isa, Jesus, was put over another man, and they killed that man. And those who differ therein are full of doubts. They have no certain knowledge. They follow nothing but conjecture. For surely they killed him not, i.e., Isa, Jesus, son of Mary, Miriam. But Allah raised him, Isa, Jesus, up with his body and soul unto himself, and he is in the heavens, and Allah is ever powerful, all wise. Now, let's find out the way this has been translated throughout Quranic translations. And let's compare some translations here. The ones on the top are non-Muslim scholars. The one on the bottom are Muslim scholars, okay? And let's take a look at these. So, Sale, but he was represented by one in his likeness. Bell, but he was counterfeited for them. Arbery, only a likeness of that was shown to them. Jones, but it was made to seem so to them. And then now we're in Islamic or Muslim translations. Ali, but the matter was made dubious to them. That's Maulvi Muhammad Ali. This next one is Yusuf Ali. But so it was made to appear to them. Pickthall, but it appeared so unto them. Abdul Halim thought it was made to, though it was made to appear like that to them. Bakhtir, but a likeness was shown to them. So when you compare the translations, you get an idea of the way it's dealt with or handled. And it seems to me to be pretty much the same idea. Well, the question is, where did that idea come from? Well, remember I mentioned earlier Christian apologists writing against Docetic and Gnostic ideas way back in the day, 180s, 150s. Well, here we got Irenaeus against heresies, book 1, chapter 24, section 4. What does he say? This is regarding Basilides, who died around 120. So he's writing about a heresy that was prior to him. And now Irenaeus is going to describe this particular Gnostic teacher's idea. Listen to this. Guys, this is going back to the 2nd century of Christianity, okay? Now, let's take a look at this. He did not himself suffer death, but Simon, a certain man of Cyrene, being compelled, bore the cross in his stead. So they're teaching Simon of Cyrene didn't just carry the cross, he ended up on there. So that this latter being transfigured by him, that he might be thought to be Jesus. Now, let me try something I've never done before. Al-Fadi, I've been working on this thing where while I'm live on another channel, I can do something. I don't know if it'll work because like I said, I've never tried it before. We're just going to try this, see if this will work. Because when I see Simon being described as transfigured, here's what it makes me think of. Did it work?
It did for me.
You heard it? Did you recognize that sound?
Well, it's a movie, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the transforming sound. You know,
the Transformers, exactly.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Autobots roll out. So, anyways,
that's why we love vocab.
So that's what I'm thinking of. They got Simon transforming into Jesus, that he might be thought to be Jesus, was crucified through ignorance and error, while Jesus himself received the form of Simon. So this is Freaky Friday. This is literally Freaky Friday. You guys understand? I guess we could even say Freaky Good Friday. And standing by, laughed at them. So Jesus is looking over at Simon the Transformer, and he's like, he's laughing at, this is what the Gnostics taught. Jesus is laughing. Basically, he's laughing at their ignorance. That's the idea there. For since he was in incorporeal power and the nous mind of the unborn Father, he, hold on, transfigured himself as he pleased, and thus ascended to him who had sent him, deriding them, inasmuch as he could not be laid hold of, and was invisible to all. So Jesus is laughing while this poor guy is on the cross. So instead of Jesus dying for your sin, Simon is dying for Jesus? You know, this is messed up, not to mention deceptive, but this is what he taught. But the Father, without birth and without name, perceiving that they would be destroyed, sent his own first begotten nous, he it is who is called Christ, to bestow deliverance on them that believe in him from the power of those who made the world. Notice, according to this Gnostic teacher that Irenaeus is describing, what do you need deliverance from? From the power of those who made the world. And this is usually in most Gnostic schemas guarded by something called the archons. The archons are kind of like mini bosses of physical reality. Or maybe you might say they're Agent Smiths trying to keep you in the matrix. He appeared then on earth as a man to the nations of these powers and wrought miracles, wherefore he did not himself suffer death. So notice, Irenaeus describing a teacher back in 120 AD, Basilides, who taught the exact same thing that entered into Gnostic sources. But
exactly. And, you know, that's very important, by the way. Let me come back again so people can see me
and
not hear me. It's extremely important. What Vocab is doing here is an amazing research. I saw some people are saying that somehow, because our brother Lloyd DeYoung is talking about the same thing, that somehow Vocab is mimicking that. No, everybody's doing their own research. What? I mean, I'm not supposed to do our research just because Vocab did the research on this? I mean, just a silly argument. But all that to say, the more the better, actually. The more the merrier. So the reason why this is extremely important, and even if we add that others like Lloyd DeYoung, whom I respect and I work with also, have uncovered things like this, it proves a very simple fact. Islam is a copy and paste religion, period.
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of like, so the Muslims, we hate to break it to you, but don't you see it? You know, just you know, drop the book. Like there's an old school 90s thing that guys who thought they were cool would say when they're trying to get the girl, and they would say, drop that zero and get with the hero. Well, we say that to you, you know, drop that zero, get with the hero. But by the hero, we mean the Bible, the scripture, the word of God, Jesus, not the Quran. But yeah, I've seen some of Lloyd's stuff, and he does great work. He kind of specializes in on YouTube, and I've seen some good stuff as far as that. But this has been around, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is something that has been recognized prior. And in fact, there's charges of plagiarism even in the Quran itself. It seems like people of the day recognized this aspect of the Quran, because in the Quran, it's got people saying, this sounds like some legends and fables you're putting up in there, you know? And we're basically like, yeah, those people were back there. They were right, you know? But there's been stuff written about this. I even have a scholarly book, I don't think it's written by Christian scholars. It's all about crucifixion in the Quran. And they get into some of this, and they do some interesting stuff. Although they try to kind of save Islam in the process. You know what they say? They say, well, actually, it's the opposite of anti-Semitic if you think about it. And we're like, wait, what do you mean? The Quran's not opposite of anti-Semitic. And the scholars sometimes of this variety will say, well, because it's taking the blame off of killing Jesus away from the Jews. Now, a full reading of the Bible should understand that ultimately, you know, it's it's God's own choice about why the crucifixion happened. In Acts 2 and Acts 4 say it was predetermined by his hand and his plan. And of course, Pilate's the one who signed the order, and Romans are the ones who invented or perfected crucifixion and actually enacted it. So, to blame one group is silly, but nonetheless, it's a funny thing that they say. They'll sometimes say it's actually the opposite of anti-Semitic because it takes away the blame from the Jewish people. But even in this context, you have the whole point is to say, oh, you Jews are bragging about killing Jesus, but you were wrong. So I don't know. That doesn't seem like the opposite of anti-Semitic to me. But anyways, returning back to this, and I do say the more the merrier. Carm, they've got a great article on this that I'm going to share later. I'm going to point people to, and there's some other good resources out there about this. But now I don't just want to show Irenaeus talking about this. I want to show the second treatise of Great Seth, another Gnostic work, where it actually has it in the words of the Gnostic source itself. So this is not Irenaeus talking about it. This is actually a Gnostic writing itself. Here's what it says. I was not afflicted at all, yet I did not die in solid reality, but in what appears, in order that I not be put to shame by them. Another, their father, was the one who drank the gall in the vinegar. It was not I. Another was the one who lifted up the cross on his shoulder, who was Simon. So notice how Irenaeus got it exactly right about some of these Gnostic sects. Who did he say they taught was up on the cross? Simon. And what does the second treatise of Great Seth say? Simon. Another was the one on whom they put the crown of thorns. But I was rejoicing in the height over all the riches of the archons and the offspring of their error and their conceit. And I was laughing at their ignorance. Notice again, the Gnostic emphasis is here on wisdom and knowledge and true understanding and secret information over against the ignorance of the unwashed masses. Because, of course, Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, and gnosis, of course, is Greek for knowledge or wisdom. And so you see that right there, as well as this idea of archons and the offspring of their error and their conceit. This has to do with physical reality. Now, listen to what this Gnostic Jesus continues to say. And notice how it's destructive of the incarnation. I visited a bodily dwelling. I cast out the one who was in it previously, and I went in. So this is, again, Jesus switching places with somebody. And the whole multitude of the archons was disturbed. So in the Gospels, you'll have the crowds being disturbed, right? Here, the archons are upset about this teaching, and all the physical matter of the archons, along with the powers born of the earth, began to tremble, like when you're on your iPhone and you hit the little button to delete an app and they're shaking like that. The archons are over there, they're disturbed and they're shaking. They're beginning to tremble. The earth too, when it saw the likeness of the image, since it was mixed. And I was the one who was in it, not resembling the one who was in it previously. So since Jesus inhabited this other, I guess, now it's mixed because it's different. Really bizarre. But look at what he continues to say. For he was a worldly man, but I am from above the heavens. So it's almost like War of the Worlds at this point, where they come and overtake the body of the host, and there's elements of the host left, but it's this kind of mixed form and sometimes manifest more alien-like. He was a worldly man, but I am from above the heavens. My goodness. I did not refuse them on the one hand, and I became the Christ. This is what the second treatise of Great Seth says. Now, when you read Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code or see the major motion picture, which came out 20 years ago now at this point, but if you've seen it, it's not a sloucher of a movie in the sense of it's got Tom Hanks in it. I don't remember everybody else, but the guy that played Magneto was in there too, and they're in this movie, and you hear things like the Professor T being saying, well, there was 80 gospels and this 4 made the cut because it was the ones people had the power. And these other gospels, they portrayed a more human Jesus. And then you actually read it. This is not a more human Jesus. And these other gospels are not gospels, and they're way after the fact. No wonder they didn't make the cut. Just don't let them lie to you about these Gnostic gospels. And the shame is some of this stuff would have been forgotten in a sense, but now some of these myths are perpetuated because the Quran goes around and teaches Jesus Christ was not crucified. A real shame. Now let's take a look at the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter, which is in Coptic. That's why it's sometimes called the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter. And as our Egyptian brothers will point out, this is like the original language of the Egyptians because it wasn't no Arabic. How do you know Islam is an imperialistic, colonializing religion? Because in Egypt, they speak Arabic now. I'm just saying, bro. The Coptic Apocalypse of Peter. This is circulated circa 180 AD, circulated in Arabia during the time of Muhammad and Syriac. There's actually a picture of the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter. And, to those who know Greek, you're like, well, that looks like Greek. Well, that's because it kind of is. It's like basically Egyptian and the Greek characters instead of hieroglyph and all that. Okay, so Coptic Apocalypse of Peter. Here we go. I saw him, Jesus, seemingly, there's that docetic tendency, like appears, seemingly being seized by them. And I said, what do I see, O Lord? That it is you yourself whom they take, and that you are grasping me? Or who is this one, glad and laughing on the tree? And is it another one whose feet and hands they are striking? So you got Peter saying, well, what's going on in here? What am I seeing? Is that really you? Or who's the one laughing? What's going on? And, you get whole sermons and books from this. Specifically, one book I'm thinking of in mind called The Laughing Jesus. And it's about this idea, this concept. These are modern books basically saying like, that's the right Jesus or something like that. The Savior said to me, he whom you saw on the tree, glad and laughing, this is the living Jesus. But this one into whose hands and feet they drive the nails in his fleshly part, which is the substitute being put to shame, the one who came into being in his likeness. But look at him and me. So Jesus is not the one on the tree. He's not the one whose flesh is being pounded and who's being, put under great duress and experiencing pain. It's not him. It's this substitute. And Jesus is over there laughing about it. Look at this. These fools. I mean, what kind of Jesus is this, man? Well, Coptic Apocalypse of Peter continues and says, but I, when I had looked, said, Lord, no one is looking at you. Let us flee this place. But he said to me, I have told you, leave the blind alone. So these are the ignorant Christians who really think Jesus got crucified. And you see how they do not know what they are saying. Now that's interesting. That sort of ends up, that's where you see in the Quranic denial of the crucifixion of Jesus, you kind of get those tones, conjecture, no certain knowledge. And you see how they do not know what they are saying. You guys see what I'm saying there? For the son of their glory instead of my servant, they have put to shame. And I saw someone about to approach us resembling him. There's that Docetism, even him who was laughing on the tree. And he was with a Holy Spirit, and he is the Savior. And there was a great ineffable light around them, and the multitude of ineffable and invisible angels blessing them. So this guy's getting beat up and hacked. Jesus is laughing and chilling with angels, And when I looked at him, the one who gives praise was revealed. So that's the Coptic Apocalypse of Peter. Now ask yourself, doesn't that sound like what you got in the Quran? But there's more. Let's go to the Acts of John. The Acts of John, you can find it on the website there. Take a screenshot, go there. All these are publicly available. I didn't put the place for every single one of them, but you can get all these because guess what? They're out of print, and no Gnostics are around to make you do a copyright or anything like that. So these are all available online somewhere. This is from the Edgar Henneke edited New Testament Apocrypha, Volume 2 here, this particular translation. And let's take a look here at this. Acts of John, chapter 97. And when he was hung upon the cross on Friday, at the 6th hour of the day, there came darkness over the whole earth. And my Lord stood in the middle of the cave and gave light to it and said, John, For the people below in Jerusalem, I am being crucified and pierced with lances and reeds and given vinegar and gall to drink. But to you I am speaking, and listen to what I speak. So you see how, again, it's this notation of secret. So they think this is happening, but John, come over here, John. Let me tell you something real quick. That's not me. Hey, John, you got this secret knowledge, this secret wisdom. Come over here, John. See, that's the idea here of what you get with Gnosticism in general. So let me show you a couple other phrases from 99 and 101 from the same document, where Jesus says in 99, neither am I he who is upon the cross. And then 101, he says this, I have suffered none of the things which they will say of me. Okay. You hear that I have suffered, yet I have suffered not. They say that I was pierced, but I was not wounded, that I was hanged, but I was not hanged, that blood flowed from me, yet it did not flow. And in a word, those things that they say of me, I did not endure. He's like, don't worry about me. I'm good. None of that happened. Now, is this not a direct denial of what you have in the actual New Testament? Let's stop and think about that for a second. In Isaiah 53, is Jesus Christ not clearly portrayed years before he was on the scene as a suffering servant of Isaiah? Christians have known for a long time the answer to that is yes. And you can see that in Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho the Jew, even there. Suffering servant. But he didn't suffer. Okay. I was pierced, but I was not wounded. They say I was pierced, but I was not wounded. Again, it literally says when you get into Psalm 22, when you get into Isaiah 53, that's what would happen about the Messiah. For us, by the way. All right. I was hanged, but I was not hanged. Paul says, cursed is the one who's hanged on a tree. And so this is showing Jesus took the curse for us, but they just deny that. No, Jesus is portrayed as denying that that's him in these Gnostic works. That blood flow from me, that's exactly what John, who was an eyewitness, said he saw in the account in John and wrote about it later, I believe, in 1 John, the epistle that went along with the gospel. Yet here it's denied. In a word, those things that they say of me, I did not endure. Do you see why Christians rejected Gnosticism? And then shame on Muhammad for resurrecting it from the dead. Shame, shame, shame. One article I do want to recommend to you that I mentioned earlier briefly from carm.org, written by Luke Wayne. It's good, and it has some of this stuff, so you can take a look at it yourself. The Qur'an, the Crucifixion, and the Gnostics. And there's the site. But it's pretty easy to find on the website, but it has some good stuff there. And that's the main stuff I wanted to share from there, except one other thing I wanted to say, and we'll see if we can get into these corruptions that I mentioned earlier, if we have time. But let me say this briefly, just about how we know what we know briefly about Gnosticism, because I mentioned some things briefly. By the way, that's the Dobercam. I don't know if you guys know, it's kind of small in the stream, but I have a Doberman, and the Doberman has a Dobercam. And so if she's hanging out in the studio with me, she's got her own camera. So she's sleeping right now, chilling. So when you see what's going on as far as Gnosticism and Gnostic sources, just some brief background. Not all of them, but a lot of them we found in Egypt in 1945. And so for a long time, we had bits and pieces of Gnostic fragments and stuff. And then we had early church writers talking about the Gnostics, but we didn't have a whole lot of their own documents. We had some, but in December of 1945 in Egypt, you have two younger guys who were digging for fertilizer in the Nile River Valley there, and they found a sealed storage jar, treasure trove of documents, 52 or so ancient manuscripts. That's what they found. And they all portrayed, to one degree or another, Gnosticism, this movement based upon secret wisdom or knowledge. So this is apparently, by them. It got hidden at some point, and no one found it until 1945. And so this was a major thing to see, what did these guys teach? What is this? Sometimes these are works that we only have one copy of, And when you look through them, you get some of the more prominent ones are Secret Book of James, the Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Thomas, and the Secret Book of John. And here's an example. You can get modern scholastic translations. This is by Marvin Meyer, The Secret Teachings of Jesus, 4 Gnostic Gospels. The most common or prominent one, just a second, let me grab it. is probably an edition that looks like this. If people have seen it, they may have seen this. This is a standard collection, Nag Hammadi scriptures, because that's the place it's found at there. And it says all the ones that they found there at that time. This is published by Harper One. You can read these yourself, and it does a good job of debunking the idea that these should have been included in anything, because they're clearly not historical, and they're clearly anti Old Testament, a lot of them. And they have names like 3 forms of first thought. That's really what the interpretation of knowledge. Here's a good one. Excerpt from the Perfect Discourse. Exegesis on the Soul, the holy book of the great invisible Spirit. The wisdom of Jesus Christ, the Acts of Peter and the 12 Apostles. And my favorite title of all is simply just one called Thunder. That's just the name of it, Thunder. And whenever I see that, I always think of thunder, thunder, Thundercats, ho! And that's the end of the presentation as far as that. I don't know if we got questions or some more stuff we want to talk about. I feel like I've been neglecting you, and I feel bad for that, Al-Fadi, because you're the man when it comes to this stuff. I need to hear what you have to say. Are you here? Hello?
All right, brother. So no worries. I mean, I wanted people to benefit from all of that, because it is, like I stated earlier, it's clear that there has been a lot of adoption of these extra biblical material into the Quran. The fact that the Quran acknowledges that Jesus, for instance, spoke from the cradle, that he created from mud birds or sparrows and breathed life into it, which is a whole different discussion, by the way, because the Quran acknowledges that only Allah can create and give life. But that will be for another discussion. I mean, things like this should really make our Muslim friends who have been watching things like that in the past or watch this show ask themselves this question: how can Allah miss the boat completely and be willing to adopt from writings that are not even acknowledged to be biblical, been rejected by the church historically, and they were written even after the time of Christ by a long time?
Yeah, I mean, you have a situation where these are clearly forgeries. For example, you have the Gospel of Philip, and I think it's usually given a date of 250. Well, Philip was obviously dead by then. It's not written by Philip. There's 1 or 2 scholars that try to make a case that one of these is actually the document that's hypothetical called Q. For example, I don't know if he still promotes it, but there is he's older now, prominent scholar at one point that basically tried to say that Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, was actually the Q source. Now, this gets into some technical New Testament scholarship stuff. This is kind of just an aside to this, so you can understand if you ever hear this stuff. But Thomas is the least Gnostic of the ones that I'm aware of, meaning some of the sayings that Jesus gives in the Gospel of Thomas are actually just Orthodox canonical sayings, just put in there. About half of it, I think, is essentially New Testament allusions or quotations. And the other half has got the weird stuff, like if you chop a tree and look, and there I am. And the weirdest one of all is how it ends, saying 114, which, whenever people talk about these Gnostic gospels being liberators of women or something like that versus the Orthodox misogynistic Orthodox gospels, you look at the last one and it's got Peter saying, hey, Jesus, tell Mary to go away because, she's like a woman and she's not worthy of life. And Jesus is like, don't worry, Peter, I'll just turn her to a male. I'll turn her to male so she can receive eternal life. Wait, wrong answer, Jesus. This wrong answer, bro. But that's what Jesus is saying and saying. Now, what do? They try to say, oh, that has to do with upending cultural expectations and societal norms. It doesn't mean that Jesus is actually saying that he's going to, in some way, transform. This has to do with reversing the standard roles. And so this is the kind of stuff they try to do when they go to bat for these Gnostic Gospels. But when you read about what Tertullian and these guys wrote about these Gnostic Gospels, you're like, they were basically right. Because they would say things like, we've got 4 Gospels. These Gnostics got a grip because somebody has a bad dream, wakes up and writes one and says, look, new gospel. And then they're all like, yay, new gospel. And what's the reason? Because they're not concerned with historical veracity. They're concerned with promoting their philosophy. kind of
Oh,
like
that's
Muhammad.
interesting. Isn't that exactly the purpose of the Quran? Not concerned
Yes.
with historical veracity, only promoting religious philosophy. I mean, that's another part. By the way, there is a reason why John of Damascus stated that Islam is a Christian heresy. I mean, somebody had to
Yeah.
really take this claim seriously because he does know something about the origin of these teachings. And he obviously knows also that its original followers, its early followers, were one way or another affiliated with the Christian community, but then strayed away from that orthodoxy.
Yeah. Because I'm like, your prophet guy, he can't discern that for these tales and these myths that they're legends, not from God. He can't tell that. He doesn't
But
know
also,
that. He's, you know,
exactly, exactly. Let me ask you a question. The documents you mentioned, for instance, did you happen to also study where they originated from, geographically speaking?
where they originated from. Almost all the texts that I'm aware of are written in Greek, or at least originally in Greek. Sometimes we only have translations left. Where they originated from is a whole thing in and of itself. Now, of course, they end up in Egypt because dry climate, stuff lasts longer. You have a greater chance of finding stuff. Okay, so that's why we get them there. Origination, no, except for the case of the Gospel of Thomas. It's probably the most studied out of all of them. And let me show you a quick book that I have here. Where did I put that book? I'm trying to find this.
I think your Doberman ate it.
Oh yeah, she ate my homework. The Doberman ate my homework. Yeah, so this is one book. Mark Goodacre, Atomics in the Gospels, the case for Thomas's familiarity with the synoptics. This is a good book. He's a high level scholar. He actually is at Duke. Sometimes he's on Premier Christian Radio and stuff.
He hasn't been impacted by these anti-Israel movements at Duke.
Mark Goodacre is somewhat moderate. I don't know about his sort of views on that kind of stuff, but he does good work that you can draw from.
No, I'm worried about his safety. Because
right. Oh,
yeah, we have bright students, who are chanting for Hamas over there. So
yeah, it's tough. It's sad. I hope Mark's okay too. Actually, yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question.
So the reason why I'm asking question, by the way, Vocab, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
The reason why I'm asking about the origin, because as we've stated, clearly in many of our shows, myself and Jay Smith, is that everything about Islam comes from North, man. And why would the Quran talks about things that are happening North rather than to talk about things that are happening in its vicinity, allegedly in Mecca or Medina, unless the faith itself, the religion itself, originated from areas like this and migrated south rather than migrating north.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's interesting. Yeah. That is interesting.
We may have to look into that. We may have to look into that. Yeah.
There might be something there.
That will be our next episode,
With Thomas, there's some evidence that it originates within Syria, or at least Syriac quasi-Christian Gnostics.
Exactly. You see my point? It is something north, bro. We need to look into it seriously.
Yeah, and so I remember the first time I heard this was from I can't even remember his name right now, but Gary Habermas's understudy, who's a PhD in his own right, Mike. Well, I can't remember his last name. What's wrong with me? But anyways, writes a lot on Mike Lacona. My goodness, writes on the resurrection. But Mike Lacona mentioned that there's evidence that Thomas shows familiarity not just with the synoptics, but specifically with the Diatessaron. So the Diatessaron is something that was really used as pretty much exclusively within Syriac-speaking Christianity. Diatessaron, basically the idea is it's from Greek. The idea is through four or with four. And
it's the harmonized gospel. It's it's an interesting point, by the way, Vocab. Finish your thought. I'm going to tell you why it's interesting.
Well, so if Thomas is familiar with the Diatessaron, clearly the Diatessaron is a collation of earlier texts, so it's later. And if Thomas is familiar with that, it's even later yet. Meaning that's what it seems like Thomas is drawing from, is from Diatessaron understanding. So that makes it Syriac, and it makes it late, because you'll see a lot of scholars try to put Thomas as early as possible, but there's indications it's not as early as sometimes they want it to be. But go ahead.
Yeah. So just explaining what the Diatessaron to everybody, it's taken the four gospels and putting them in one book as if it's a harmonized story. You read like the gospel as one gospel now, and it contains almost 70 to 80%, give or take, from the gospels. The reason why this is interesting, by the way, because there is this also theory out there that it is quite possible that when the Quran talks about the Injil in a singular, it's talking about the Diatessaron.
Oh, hey, that actually makes sense. I've never thought about that or heard that before. That actually would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I want to highlight just a super chat. Thank you, Dennis. And your question is about Sufism. Now, I can tell you, I'll tell you briefly what Sufism is, and then hopefully, Vocab, you can add if you have anything else. Sufism, by the way, is what we call mystical Islam. That's pretty much what it is. It's almost a form of mysticism. It has asceticism to it, basically suffering. And they're known also as the desert, basically, priest, if you wish. Technically speaking, they're people that believe that you have to purify yourself to gain more knowledge about God to the point that you are very familiar with God, and maybe even God will dwell in you. And that's the whole idea. And they follow leaders, walis, basically, and they have orders that they belong to. But it is not, even though they're based upon Sunni theology, that's their origin, their foundation, they're considered by many Muslims to be heretical, or at least not representing the orthodoxy of Islam. Believe it or not, folks, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, was a Sufi guy at some point.
What?
Yeah.
Well, I have a small sort of story about Sufism, if I could briefly, because to me it was always a funny story to me, but this is something that happened personally. So I was living in Tempe at the time, and I had a neighbor who I would witness to, but he would always say, I'm Muslim, and he was a convert, a Black American convert into Islam, and then I was out one day, Mill Avenue, doing some witnessing stuff, and I saw him with another guy who appeared to be a Muslim. It looks like they had just got back from the Tempe Mosque. It was in a parking lot close to there. And then another friend I knew who went by a nickname Fable. And I knew Fable too from my sort of underground hip hop days and stuff like that. We would do open mics together. My point is, I didn't know the Fable and my neighbor knew each other, right? So I go up to them because understand, yes, they're Muslims, but two of the three guys I knew. I had friendly relationships with two of three of them. I just didn't know the third guy. So I go up to the first guy first, the one I didn't know, and was like, "Hey, what's up, man?" And tried to just shake his hand, and he wouldn't shake a hand. So I just did the rock, and he was like, "What's up, man?" I was like, "Oh, okay." He wouldn't even look my way, wouldn't even extend his hand. I was like, maybe he doesn't know me. That's why. So then I went to the next guy, but I indicated I knew them already. Then my neighbor, and I'm like, "Hey, what's up, man?" He's like, "Hey, what's up, man? But yeah, I can't shake, unclean." And I'm like, "Okay, bro." I mean, he didn't act like that when he was just being my neighbor and I was witnessing to him. He didn't act all like standoffish like this, right? So then I go to the last guy finally, and Fable doesn't just shake my hand, but he gives me a hug. He's like, "Hey, brother, what's up, man?" I'm like, "Hey, yo, what's up, man?" He's like, "Oh, they're Sunni, I'm Sufi." So the indication is, he could hug me, embrace me because he's Sufi, but the guys he's hanging out with, they're Sunni, so they can't. So that was the explanation for their behavior of just totally ignoring me and all that. I always thought that was a funny story within that. He's cool with it, but not the other two. So that's one of my little experiences with that. So he was also a convert, by the way, but I'm Sunni, they're Sufi. I'm sorry, I'm Sufi, they're Sunni. Anyways.
So, brother, what else? I love these kind of topics. They're unique. They're different. They line up with the approach I like to take. It's academic, based on research, and it shows also something harmful. I hate to say the word harmful to the origin of Islam, but hopefully it will be enlightening to our Muslim friends. We want them to begin to realize that they're standing on a fictitious foundation. But the idea is, we don't want you just to leave Islam. We want you to come to Jesus. That's our savior, the true Jesus, not the made-up Jesus of the Quran, not the made-up Jesus of the Gnostics, the true and pure Jesus who is the living God, who is alive today. Even by the admission of the Quran, he's alive. Even by the admission of the Quran, he is near Allah, above the heavens. So that's really why I focus on things like this. So I guess my question to you, brother, what can we do from here? Because I like to, next time, of course, myself and Vocab are talking about a regular thing together. So next time, brother, we need to focus on areas like this.
I'm with it. I mean, I have a presentation too I've worked on that's basically sort of an answer to all this. That's the fact that we can know that Jesus was crucified and did die on the cross. You know, that's something else I have.
That's great.
But I also, but that's one thing. I also have some stuff I'm working on to show what it looks like when Islam runs into other religions. And it's interesting to see. Specifically, this gets into my area of Hebrew Israelism, because I now possess the first book written by a faithful Sunni Muslim that's a criticism against the Hebrew Israelites. Because what's happening is they're running into them more and more, especially in places like Speaker's Corner. And it's interesting to analyze their interactions and their dialogue. So I'm working on developing some material that's kind of analyzing the way these groups sort of are interacting with this kind of new religious dialogue and debate, because they're essentially competitors for similar demographics a lot of times. And that's
be careful, be careful, bro, because there are some hardliners who are Christians who think if you use material by non-Christians, somehow you are deviating away from the faith, bro.
Oh yeah, I got you. Well, I'm not. So I picked this book up more to study it. This book is not necessarily overly helpful, in my opinion, because a large part of the book is not actually really criticizing Hebrew Israelism proper. It's basically criticizing elements of
because they don't have the proper biblical foundation for it. They will criticize it from an Islamic point of view.
Yeah. So a lot of the criticism actually is just stuff that I would want to respond to as a Christian. There's a few things in there that are sort of more specific in relationship to it, but it's just fascinating to see. And so I've been doing some analysis of that, but it's not like I'm like, oh, this is the greatest resource to refute Hebrew Israelites. It's more an analysis of it. But there's a couple of areas. And something else I'm getting into is the destructive nature of polygamy upon societal units and what that means. You know, I'm doing some stuff on that, but some of this is in its formative stages. The other ones I already have more completed.
So everybody, we're going to have Vocab for another 8 minutes. You can highlight your question through Super Chat if you like. But if you have any questions, please place them right here for us right away. Questions based on what you've heard, not comments, questions. We appreciate all the comments, of course. We appreciate the knowledge of many of you. I've been looking at all of that. I know people think like I don't pay attention to live chats, but I do. I put people sometimes in waiting rooms. I give them coffee sometimes if they really are not that hyper. And if they're very hyper, I send them sometimes to a block party, and usually they stay there for a while. All right, so here is a question for us, and thank you, Vilanius. He's saying, is there some Gnostic examples that did make the cut, Vocab?
Well, does he mean they made the cut into the Bible, or made the cut where? I'm not sure what he means.
He's talking about the Quran, maybe, or Islam. That's my assumption. Let's take that approach for now until he clarifies for us. I'll keep an eye.
But he means like they made it. I'm not sure because I mean, we just showed that. So let me talk a little bit about this. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question because I'm not sure what he means by that exactly. But check this out. With this, I actually try to. I actually didn't get to emphasize this, but my position is actually sort of subtle regarding this. As far as Gnostic sources in the Quran, did Muhammad knowingly, in some way, take what he knew were Gnostic sources or something like that and put it to the Quran? I don't think we can definitively say that's what was happening per se. However, what we are saying that's definitive is these tales, these legends previously existed, and finalized versions of them end up in the Quran from things that were clearly already existing within the realm of fable and legend surrounding Jesus in the New Testament events. So the point is there that not that Quran set down, not that you know, somebody had a Quran in one hand and then Thomas in the other and was knowingly copying or something. But Muhammad or whoever was hearing this and may not have understood the source, may have we don't know that information for sure. All we know is these existed prior to the Quran, and we're just showing Gnosticism is the place where a lot of these existed.
He's asking, actually verified typo, he meant any powerful, basically, teaching by the Gnostics that powerful is my word, that did not make the cut into the Quran or Islam. We know about the ones that did, but are there things like that about Jesus or maybe other things?
Well, yeah. So you have Jesus in different Gnostic sources continuing on this being all kinds of a shapeshifter, where the disciples in these Gnostic sources will say they look at him and sometimes he looks like a little boy and then he changes forms. And the point of that within Gnosticism is supposed to be the irrelevance of physical matter and physical reality, is the idea of like, you know, he doesn't really have a form. He's sort of formless because it's not about him being, you know, embodied. It's about his knowledge and wisdom that he's dropping on us, that type of thing. So you have that. The Quran doesn't have that. But the thing is that the idea of someone else being up there on the cross actually comes out of that worldview. So the Quran I don't think would embrace that idea, sort of this shape-shifting element that's like based upon a Gnostic worldview. But yet Surah 4 indicates something like that. And then when you look at further Quranic exegesis, they kind of get into that about, well, this guy was up there instead, but it's like, but it appeared that it was actually Jesus. Well, that's very Docetic, but the Quran as a whole, Islam as a whole, doesn't embrace that Gnostic worldview. So you have this kind of result of it that apparently shows up in Surah 4, but you don't have the underpinning. That's why the whole thing is a mess, because it's strained. Likewise with that, the creation myths by the Gnostics are definitely not something that I don't think you would see within Islamic worldview, because especially there's some really weird ones that basically involve like pre-creation rape by divine beings upon one another, and they get into some strange sort. Basically, you know, you have like the Yahweh God like raping the wisdom God and all kinds of strange stuff like that. And plus you have this ignorant Yahweh God accidentally out of his own hubris making matter. And it's like, oops. And then Jesus comes to liberate us from that. And he's essentially against that Old Testament evil deity. And so that is something that would not be Islamic, because they would claim there's some kind of continuity between Old Testament, New Testament, and then to the Quran. So they're not going to chop off the whole thing at the root by having creation be wicked, or the Old Testament God making a big oopsie with the physical reality or the physical matter that's been made. Right. So those elements are not there, but yet that's what's weird about the fact that you have these stories that come out of that worldview ending up in the Quran. It does not connect how that occurs. And so that's why it's important to bring that up. So there's a lot of Gnostic stuff that was definitely not included. Yeah. There's all kinds of other tales. You got Jesus playing with one of his playmates, and one of them bump into him and he kills them and then resurrects him later. Someone's trying to teach Jesus the Greek alphabet. This is alpha. This is beta. This is gamma. This is delta.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that in the seminary. So I was Jesus in the seminary. I was learning it.
Yeah. Oh, you're funny. Yeah. Well, I got a C- in Greek, so I don't know what I was doing.
Oh, no, I got A, my friend. I got A. So there's a question by Tom Taylor. Where does the stuff about the child Jesus killing people that mocked him come from? Do we know where this originated from? I mean, like, where did they borrow it from? The Gnostics, I should say.
Oh, well, okay. So the idea that it had to come from somewhere else, I don't think we could say, you know, that's the case. But Jesus killing kids and cursing kids and giving kids leprosy, which he does well, not really leprosy, but he makes one child wither up into a corpse. That's all in the infancy Gospel of Thomas. Where it came from, though, so I don't necessarily hold that had to come from anywhere per se. What it seems to be is this: the Gnostic impulse, again, is to not really care about the historical veracity of what they're saying, but it's to promote certain things. And some of it seems inherently designed to confuse you. Like when you read some of the Gnostic literature, it seems purposely contradictory, almost like a teacher in a kung fu movie who tells you to like stand on a foot and hold a plant in the other hand, and he'll come back in 10 hours and you tell him what you learned, and then he tells you something nonsensical that has nothing to do with, these kind of, some of it's almost designed of sort of that unlocking of like what's thought as to be common sense and common knowledge or wisdom. So you are thinking outside the box. Some of the Gnostic literature has that kind of tone or ring to it, kind of almost like anti-logical in a sense. And so where those stories came from, I don't know of any evidence that those came from somewhere prior to that. And actually, hold on just a second. There's a debate about this. So in general, mainstream scholars have pushed the idea that there was a pre-Christian Gnosticism, and that maybe even the Bible itself was actually influenced by Gnosticism, and the Gnostics in some cases were recovering a truer form of Christianity or something like that. Edwin Yamauchi, I think, has shown that that's not true. He has a book called Pre-Christian Gnosticism, a Survey of the Proposed Evidences. And in this book, which has been republished by Whitfin Stock, he shows that, first of all, a lot of these are too late to be before the New Testament, these pre-Christian Gnostic sources. And a lot of them are actually not clearly Gnostic in and of themselves. And so this is actually a problem in older commentaries on the New Testament, Al-Fadi. When you get some of these older commentaries in the New Testament, you'll find they keep on saying this was against the Gnostic heresy. And it's because there was sort of this preconceived notion in a certain stage of New Testament scholarship that Gnosticism was basically almost in full bloom at the time of the epistles and things like that. And so they're constantly writing against it. Latter scholarship has corrected that and shown that really Gnosticism was not in full bloom until much later. And you get traces of it probably in 1 John and maybe a little bit with what's called the Colossian heresy. And Clint Arnold of Biola and Talbot has done some good work on the Colossian heresy. And
the Colossian heresy, by the way, folks, talking about the letter that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae, right, attacking certain heretical teachings in there.
Yes. Yeah. And people used to just be like, oh, this is Gnosticism. Now they call it more accurately, it's called the Colossian heresy, because they realized this was not Gnosticism proper. It has these other elements to it that this. When you read about what apparently they were teaching or believing there, it seems sort of unique, like perhaps localized flavor, but it's not proper just to call it.
It had to do with Jesus and his divinity and his authority. Yes. And that's what, by the way, one of those elements is used by the Jehovah's Witness in Colossians 1:15, that Jesus is the first of, the firstborn of creation, or the first made of creation, which really doesn't mean he was created first. Or it means is that he's the prototype.
Yes. Yeah. And you look at that and you kind of say, okay, so my point by saying all that was that Gnosticism is not as early, I think, as some people will try to push it or make it be. And it was later. And so it wasn't 100% kind of dealt with in the pages of the New Testament. We have to look to later Christian apologists and whatnot who really went, especially and specifically Irenaeus. To me, he kind of did the final takedown of Gnosticism and really kind of just exposed it for what it was and really put it to bed. But even earlier, Ignatius, 106 or so, he was writing things that clearly were designed to go against the Gnostic impulse, where he talked about the very physical reality of Jesus and the incarnation and things like that. And he's clearly writing against it. And you realize when you read Dan Brown or watch the Da Vinci Code or things like that pop up on PBS or whatever every year around resurrection time, you realize that there's a lot of basically propaganda in some of this New Testament scholarship, and we got to challenge the presuppositions that are there. And there's been some great Christians who have done some great work with this idea. So Gnosticism is an interesting thing, and it's really variegated because they didn't really agree on a lot, the Gnostics themselves, because they're popping out gospels left and right. They've got different teachers. Oh, this Valentinus, and there's different versions of Gnosticism. And so there's a lot going on there. Some because they had the low view of the physical body, said, therefore you can be a libertine, do whatever, it doesn't matter. Others said, no, be an aesthetic because you've got to deny the physical body. You see what I'm saying? They would go different places with the practical sort of living in regards to a Gnostic light. But at the end of the day, it's destructive to the very gospel message because its salvation is based upon something entirely different. It's detached from the Old Testament. It denies the importance and reality of the cross, and it's totally, completely ahistorical. And yet Muhammad or whoever's in charge at that point of the Quranic development picks up these myths and legends and throws them in there seemingly for no purpose, because I don't really see what they really accomplish within the Quranic.
Unless that whomever wrote him comes from that Christian background and trying to influence that particular teaching among the Christian communities. I mean, that's just a hypothesis. That's just a theory that worth examining. Now, brother, you're welcome to stay for another 5 minutes, but you said you needed to leave. For some reason. Yeah.
Yes, I do. And I apologize for that. I hope we can.
No apology needed. I'm just concerned about your timing, because maybe you're not paying attention to time. That's all.
Yeah. I looked at it a few minutes ago and I was like, oh, we got plenty of time. And I looked at it again. I'm like, oh, I better leave.
Yeah.
So Al-Fadi, thank you so much for having me on. It's a beautiful blessing to see your ministry expand and grow. I remember when I first saw the YouTube channel of CIRA and things, and and compared to now, it's amazing to see, especially in kind of this environment and everything going on social media, to see you continue to be faithful and expand. And so I'm just glad to be part of it. I'm glad to see it. So keep it up, and I'm glad you got a faithful audience here.
Amen. And you and I will talk about the next episode. And definitely, folks, we will be doing regular shows together here. And before you go, I'm going to just address two quick comments here. Tom Taylor is saying, so Muhammad would surely have run into these Gnostics in Mecca and Medina. We don't think so, Tom. It appears that whomever wrote the Quran maybe ran into them somewhere outside of Mecca and Medina. I'm not aware of the fact that they were there. So that's the going theory. Or it could be, if the Mecca and Medina thesis is true, then he ran into people who believed in things like this.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because we simply don't have enough information. But from what I can tell, and there's always stuff to learn about this, it seems like Gnosticism as a real competitor Christianity had essentially died out by the time Muhammad's on the scene. Now, the case could be different in certain regions. But what it appears is, as far as being this large-scale problem that it was in the early days, essentially was not the same challenge as it was. Even within Christianity, the history, once you get to Nicaea, you're dealing with more Arians. That's a different type of a heresy. And so by this time, we have some indication that there was Gnostic-influenced Christians. And so there's a question of, were these really Orthodox Christians? That it seems like some of the people he's running into or hearing from are basically not Orthodox Christians. And there's some evidence he could have ran into more Gnostics proper, because my understanding is in small pockets of Iraq and Syria, there's still actually little pockets of people that basically still consider themselves continuation from ancient Gnostics. But I don't know a lot about the modern days of the versions of these groups who are like holding on to that, but he could have run into those that may have been bigger then. And when you look around today, this is a whole nother topic. Some of the ideas of Gnosticism are actually still present in Western culture. They're just different, and they have to do with mind over matter and mind science and stuff like that. But it's not really Gnosticism proper, but it's some of the same worldview elements repackaged for Oprah, But yeah, with that, God bless, sir.
Thank you. God bless you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please spread the word. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, CIRA International, to Vocab's channel. What is the name again, Vocab?
Street Apologist Live, youtube.com/vocab.
Go and support our brother as well. And thank you for your support for us. And we're always looking for people to be patrons through Patreon. And we will continue these live streams slowly and gradually, coming back again into doing this rhythm. And I will have more guests with me. Everyone, thank you so much. God bless. Take care. This is Al-Fadi, over and out.